Are you ready to learn the truth about what life was really like in the luxurious mansions of the 19th century? Behind the grand facades and opulent interiors lay a strict system for organizing vast spaces. Architects of that era designed houses as complex mechanisms where every detail served a specific function. The lower floors were reserved for grand halls and living rooms with high ceilings. The space under the roof remained a technical zone, strictly off-limits to guests. It was there that the servants' sleeping quarters were located. The main feature of these stone buildings was a clear division into zones for the owners and for the servants. The upper floors of the buildings were specifically designed by architects with purely practical, cost-saving goals in mind. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn why servants' quarters were typically located on the upper floors without heating so that the heat would remain in the owner's living quarters. What if everything you were taught is outdated, and the real reason for the layout lies in the strict laws of physics? Engineers of that time carefully calculated the air currents inside these massive brick boxes. Warm air from the fireplaces on the lower floors inevitably rose up the grand staircases. To keep this valuable resource in the owner's bedrooms, the upper floors were made as airtight as possible. The attic spaces served as a sort of buffer between the owner's warm rooms and the cold street. This air cushion prevented rapid heat loss through the wooden roof. The building materials of the time dictated their own conditions for the construction of tall stone buildings. Brick walls became thinner toward the upper floors to reduce the load on the deep foundation. The thin attic partitions could not effectively retain internal heat without a constant source of fire. Installing additional fireplaces directly under the roof was considered too complex and costly an engineering task. Therefore, these square meters of space were intentionally left completely unheated. The interior finish of the attics differed radically from the luxurious halls of the spacious first floor. Expensive wallpaper, stucco, or heavy mahogany paneling were never used here. The walls were usually covered with simple white plaster or left as bare brickwork. The floors were covered with rough pine planks, without expensive parquet or soft carpets. The absence of decorative wooden elements also contributed to the space cooling down quickly. Windows on the upper floors were always designed to be as small as possible. This was done so as not to disrupt the building's exterior architectural appearance with large openings. The small glass squares let in little daylight and offered little protection from the street chill. The frames were often made of cheap wood, which dried out over time and let air through. As a result, the narrow rooms under the roof were constantly drafty. A system of chimneys ran through the entire massive house, from the basement to the very roof. These brick chimneys transferred some of their heat to the rooms they passed through. However, by the time the rising smoke reached the attic, it had already cooled significantly. The thick walls of the chimneys on the top floor barely warmed the surrounding cold air. The staff derived no benefit from the fireplaces actively burning downstairs. Safety also played a key role in the decision not to heat the upper levels of the building. The use of open flames or iron stoves beneath the wooden roof trusses posed a huge fire risk. Fire departments of that time lacked the equipment to extinguish fires in tall mansions. Property owners preferred to minimize the number of fire sources in the attics. These spaces remained completely free of burning fireplaces and hot stoves. The layout of the house clearly reflected the social structure of 19th century society. The owners occupied the most comfortable, bright and spacious areas. The staff were assigned the remaining spaces, which were completely unsuitable for formal use. Attics were ideal for this purpose due to their isolation from the main traffic routes. Life under the roof was completely hidden from guests and the wealthy owners of the house. The functionality of the attics was not limited to small bedrooms for the staff. They often housed water tanks, pantries, and various utility rooms. The proximity to the cold tanks further lowered the overall air temperature on the top floor. The water in the metal tanks would sometimes form a thin layer of ice during the winter months. The bedrooms were located in close proximity to these damp and cold areas. Despite such harsh conditions, these rooms remained the only private space for the workers. Here they stored their few belongings and rested after long, physically demanding shifts. The interior of the rooms depended solely on the tidiness and ingenuity of the exhausted residents themselves. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these architectural solutions. What do you think about this layout of living spaces? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos. What I'm about to show you is banned in 12 countries, but this is exactly how the ancient builders kept their secrets. The movement of warm air in a Victorian house was governed by the strict and unyielding laws of thermodynamics. Red-hot coals and massive fireplaces heated the air, which always rose up the wide grand staircases. To stop this heat loss, thick solid floors were built between the living quarters and the attic. Heavy oak doors on the landings served as reliable thermal barriers. The attic floor served as a kind of thick insulating layer for the rooms below. Floorboards were laid over massive wooden beams, between which there was often empty space. This air gap completely prevented heat from escaping through the ceiling of the luxurious master bedrooms. Thus, the cold attic functioned like a giant thermos in reverse. It reliably protected the precious heat in the lower rooms from dissipating quickly. The roofs of Victorian mansions were covered with heavy slate or clay tiles. These materials provided excellent protection from precipitation, but did nothing to retain the temperature inside the massive building. In winter, the tiles froze solid, transmitting the outdoor cold directly into the attic space. In summer, the dark roof heated up in the sun, turning the top floor into a sort of hot oven. The lack of modern synthetic insulation made the climate under the roof extremely unstable. A huge amount of black coal was required daily to maintain warmth on the upper floors. Delivering the heavy fuel to the upper levels would have been too labor-intensive and time-consuming a task. Workers would have had to carry metal buckets up narrow, steep staircases several times a day. This would inevitably create unnecessary noise and coal dust in the immediate vicinity of the owner's quarters. Foregoing attic heating completely solved this complex logistical problem. Attic windows were often tiny dormer windows or small glazed hatches. Their primary engineering function was to ventilate the rafters to prevent the old wood from rotting. Drafts swept freely through the floor, blowing the remnants of stagnant warm air outside. It was practically impossible to close such windows tightly due to the nature of their crude construction. The air under the roof was always in constant and rapid motion. The lack of heating greatly influenced the choice of materials for furniture and simple bedding. Beds often had high, solid sides and heavy fabric canopies to protect against strong drafts. Mattresses were tightly stuffed with straw or horsehair, which did a very poor job of retaining body heat. Staff were issued only thick woolen blankets, capable of providing at least some warmth during short breaks. The entire room furnishings were as utilitarian and strictly functional as possible. The design of old Victorian fireplaces was far from the ideal of modern energy efficiency. Most of the heat generated literally flew out the brick chimney along with thick smoke. To heat the spacious formal living room, a strong fire had to be maintained throughout the day. Saving expensive fuel by leaving attics unheated allowed resources to be redirected toward the formal rooms. The cold upper floors were the inevitable price of comfort for the home's wealthy owners. The thickness of the exterior stone walls also played a critical role in maintaining a comfortable temperature. At the level of the first and second floors, the walls could be several feet thick. By the roof level, they tapered significantly to a minimum, allowing much more cold air to enter from outside. The temperature difference between the lower and upper parts of the massive building was truly colossal. This created a completely unique microclimate on each individual level of the mansion. Builders of that era actively used heavy lead to seal the external joints on the roof. The lead sheets provided reliable protection against rain leaks, but cooled instantly in low outdoor temperatures. The cold from the lead elements was directly transferred to the internal wooden structures of the unheated attic. Moisture from the air constantly condensed on the cold surfaces, making the rooms very damp. This constant dampness significantly exacerbated the overall unpleasant sensation of piercing cold. The technical solutions of that era were designed to ensure the comfort of a very narrow circle of people. Engineers applied the physics of heat distribution exclusively in the interests of wealthy property owners. Buildings were constructed as impregnable fortresses, protecting their pampered owners from the cold outside world. How effective do you think such harsh energy-saving methods were in these massive homes? In the next chapter, you'll learn how the rhythm of life took shape in this hidden space. The secret that will transform the industry lies in the smart zoning of historic spaces. Life in the attic demanded a completely unique approach to organizing scarce personal time. The residents of the upper floors rarely encountered the building's owners in an informal, relaxed setting. Their world was securely hidden behind unassuming wooden doors and steep spiral staircases. This artificial isolation created a completely unique social environment within a single large building. The layout of the attic rooms completely ruled out any architectural flourishes in the original design. The space often lacked a regular cubic shape due to the sharp slopes of the heavy roof. In some parts of the room, it was physically impossible to stand up straight. The low sloping ceilings created an oppressive and unpleasant sensation of being inside a closed wooden box. Furniture had to be arranged strictly along the walls to leave a narrow, straight passageway down the middle of the room. The lack of straight vertical walls dictated strict rules for storing the staff's personal belongings. Instead of bulky wooden wardrobes, flat, long wooden chests were used. The chests were pushed into the lowest and darkest parts of the room, right under the roof slopes. They also often served as additional seating due to the acute shortage of ordinary chairs. Every square centimeter of the wooden floor was used with maximum practicality and economy. The soundproofing between the attic and the lower living quarters was meticulously engineered. Layers of thick planks and empty air spaces reliably muffled the heavy footsteps and voices of the workers. The residents were not supposed to hear absolutely any sounds from above during their daytime rest. Reverse soundproofing from the bottom up worked much less effectively in practice. The attic dwellers could always hear the noise of parties and the clinking of dishes coming from the lower floors. The limited, cramped space required residents to strictly maintain perfect order. Items scattered on the floor could easily cause injury in low-light conditions. The workers quickly learned to keep their daily uniforms folded as neatly as possible. Cleaning the small room took a minimum of time due to the complete absence of decorative architectural details. The smooth floors were regularly and quickly wiped down with a damp cloth to remove the accumulating gray dust. A system of hidden internal wiring ran through every floor of this massive building. Metal signal bells connected each master's room to the servants' quarters. Long wire poles ran through the stone walls and emerged onto a special board directly under the roof. A sharp metallic ring could sound at absolutely any time during the long day or short night. The attic dwellers had to react instantly to every incoming sound signal. The lack of normal-sized windows severely limited the view of the surrounding area. A glance outside often came up against dirty lead gutters or neighboring tiled roofs. Seeing a bustling street or a green garden from such a height was practically impossible. This further intensified the heavy sense of isolation from the vast outside world. People's entire lives were confined exclusively within the vast, cold stone house. The division of the attic space into male and female sections was the strictest unspoken rule. Different parts of the attic were often securely isolated from one another by thick, solid walls. To move between them, one sometimes had to go all the way down to the floor below. Such architectural planning ruled out any unplanned personal encounters between different staff members. Strict discipline was enforced by the very physical layout of the stone building. Artificial lighting on the upper wooden floors was strictly controlled for fire safety. The use of sooty tallow candles was limited to just a few short hours a day. Lamps with sturdy metal grills protected the fragile glass from accidental, careless blows. Reading thick books in one's free time became an extremely difficult task due to the lack of light. Eyes grew tired very quickly in the constant, gray twilight of the attic. The isolation of these cramped spaces created a completely different rhythm of life compared to the main floors. The austere geometry of the sloping roofs dictated strict rules for movement and storage. The hidden world beneath the roof tiles functioned seamlessly, like a precisely tuned clockwork mechanism. Every detail of the interior was entirely subordinated to strict and mundane utility. If you found these hidden aspects of architecture interesting, be sure to like this video. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how many kilometers these people walked vertically? The attic dwellers' schedule was strictly tied to a complex system of internal, labyrinthine passageways. The long workday always began long before the wealthy owners of the mansion woke up. The descent from the cold upper floor to the basement kitchens took up a considerable amount of precious time. The dark, narrow stone corridors demanded the utmost caution with every quick step. Movement through the house was restricted to strictly defined, hidden routes. The black service staircases were designed by architects to be as compact as possible to save space. The wooden steps were very narrow, and their angle of inclination often exceeded comfortable anatomical limits. The sharp turns of the spiral staircases made carrying heavy loads an extremely inconvenient task. Carrying buckets of black coal or hot water became a daily test of physical endurance. Mistakes during a quick descent could easily lead to serious and painful falls. The lack of any heating on the upper flights of stairs made morning descents particularly harsh. The temperature in the stone stairwells often dropped very low in winter. The transition from the cold attic area to the warm kitchen created a sharp and unpleasant temperature contrast. The wooden handrails remained absolutely icy to the touch throughout the long winter. The windows in the stairwells often did not close tightly due to warped old frames. The staff's footwear had to meet specific and very strict safety requirements. Smooth soles were not allowed to slip on the polished stone stair treads. Fabric shoes with soft soles were preferred over heavy, rough leather boots. This also helped them move quickly through the vast house almost silently. Absolute silence was one of the most important requirements for working in the enormous building. Transporting various bulky items between floors required special physical dexterity. Heavy objects had to be lifted slowly, using special rope winches. Baskets of clean, damp laundry or dishes were carried by hand, maintaining perfect balance. The walls of the narrow corridors often showed visible scuffs at shoulder height from constant friction. The available space had been calculated by the builders down to the very last millimeter. The number of quick ascents and descents in a single workday could run into the dozens. Every sharp ring of the bell signaled the need for an immediate descent to the appropriate floor. After precisely carrying out the assignment, one had to return immediately to one's starting position. Such intense physical activity served as a substitute for any sports or muscle training for the staff. Outstanding stamina was the most crucial quality for long-term work in a large house. Passing each other on the narrow, dark staircases presented certain spatial challenges. It was a very difficult task for two adults carrying luggage to pass each other on the narrow steps. There were strict, unspoken rules of priority when moving upward or descending quickly. A person descending with a heavy load always had the right of way over someone ascending unburdened. These simple rules helped avoid dangerous head-on collisions in the thick twilight. The black staircases were lit only by small skylights in the roof. In winter, the dim daylight was woefully insufficient for moving about in complete safety. Small oil lamps were mounted on the stone walls, giving off a faint yellow light. The steps often remained in deep, dark shadow, requiring perfect muscle memory. Movement took place literally by touch, with one's hand resting on the smooth wooden wall. Constantly carrying heavy loads vertically shaped a distinctive professional posture among the workers. The need to keep one's back rigidly straight while lifting loads developed a very upright gait. Proper weight distribution across the shoulders helped conserve energy throughout the long day. The ability to balance a heavy tray on the stairs became a key professional skill. Every physical movement was honed through years of practice until it became completely automatic. The complex daily logistics of a huge house relied entirely on hard physical labor. Narrow staircases served as the main arteries through which the life of the building flowed continuously. Could you cover such enormous vertical distances every day? In the next chapter, you'll learn the details of exactly how the wooden attic space was constructed. The interior architecture of the space directly under the roof differed radically from the grand lower levels. The wooden trusses made of solid oak or pine remained completely exposed to view. These intersecting thick beams took up a significant portion of the usable volume of the small room. Tall people had to constantly duck as they moved through the cramped space. The sharp, protruding corners of the wooden structures posed a constant hidden danger in the dark. The floor was always laid with wide pine planks without any thorough final sanding. The gaps between these planks sometimes reached several millimeters due to the natural shrinkage of the wood. Gray dust and small dry debris constantly fell into these deep gaps. The absence of soft carpets made every step on the wooden floor echo and sound very loud. Washing such floors required a large amount of cold water and very stiff brushes. The walls were covered with the cheapest white mixture made from chalk and ordinary glue. This simple whitewash quickly became dirty and easily flaked off at the slightest careless touch. Stains of dampness often showed through the thin layer of coating after prolonged autumn rains. The walls had to be repainted annually to maintain even a minimal level of cleanliness. This labor-intensive process fell entirely on the shoulders of the exhausted residents of the top floor themselves. Heavy roofing materials were fastened directly onto a thin wooden roof deck. The shingles, or thin gap-filled boards, offered little protection against the cold outdoor air. Strong, gusty winds caused the roof to creak loudly and vibrate throughout the night. Heavy raindrops drummed on the roof slopes with a deafening, monotonous noise. Sound insulation from the noisy outside world was virtually non-existent at this level. Small, round cast-iron grills served as the only built-in system for constant ventilation. They were built directly into the exterior brick walls beneath the wooden eaves of the roof. It was completely impossible to regulate the flow of outside air through these open vents. In winter, they became a source of a constant and very strong icy draft. Covering these grates with thick paper was strictly prohibited by basic fire safety regulations. The geometry of the cramped rooms exactly mirrored the jagged lines of the large wooden roof. Some bedrooms had the odd shape of an elongated triangle with a single tiny dormer window. Arranging furniture in such a non-standard space was no easy task. Beds were pushed into the lowest far corners to free up the valuable center of the room. Getting out of the narrow bed in the morning required special care. Massive brick chimney flues cut through the attic rooms in the most unexpected places. The thick brickwork of the flues took up a lot of space and greatly obstructed direct passage. Touching them was completely pointless, as they remained icy cold on the outside. Fine black soot often gathered around these pipes, seeping through micro cracks in the bricks. This coal dust quickly settled on the wooden floor and the workers' personal belongings. The doors to the tiny attic rooms were made of very thin wooden panels. They lacked good mortise locks and did not fit tightly against the warped door frame. A wide gap directly beneath the door allowed additional airflow from the long corridor. A knock on such a thin door echoed loudly throughout the entire long passageway. Privacy in such conditions was a highly relative and unattainable concept. Storage systems were built directly into the available sloped architectural niches by carpenters. Instead of cabinets, long open shelves were used, roughly nailed directly to the rafters. Clothes were always stored folded in wooden boxes right under the bed. There was practically nowhere to hang a long winter coat or dress under such conditions. Each individual item had to occupy the strictly allotted minimum space. Basic sanitary facilities were completely and utterly absent on this upper level. Water was brought in heavy jugs for morning washing from the distant lower rooms. Cold porcelain basins and buckets stood on small washstands in a dark corner. The dirty, used water had to be carried back down the long, steep staircases. This required significant additional physical effort at the very start of each long day. This is what actually happens behind the closed doors of luxurious palaces. The window frames on the upper floors had a unique design featuring a simple pivoting mechanism. Unlike the grand sash windows of the lower levels, the sashes here were mounted on metal hinges. The cheap metal rusted quickly from the humidity, making opening the window an incredibly difficult physical task. Cold air constantly seeped in through the cracked joints of the old wooden frames. Temperature regulation in the unheated, cramped room depended entirely on the weather conditions outside. Thick, heavy curtains made of coarse canvas served as the only barrier between the glass and the room. The fabric quickly became soaked with condensation on frosty nights and froze solid by morning. During the day, the curtains had to be pulled wide open to let in the meager gray daylight. Sunlight rarely penetrated these rooms due to the specific angle of the roof. The use of additional materials on hand for insulation was strictly and rigidly regulated. Residents were allowed to place thick sheets of paper directly under their mattresses to retain body heat. Plugging gaps in the windows with old newspapers was forbidden to avoid disrupting natural air circulation. Fresh air was considered the key to health in Victorian medicine. Even if it was freezing, health was bolstered by very harsh, truly Spartan methods of hardening. Air currents inside the enormous house followed complex physical paths. The unheated attic functioned as a giant exhaust chimney for the entire massive building. Air from the lower floors, mixed with the smells of the kitchen, rushed upward through the stairwells. In the attic, this warm current quickly cooled and vanished without a trace through micro cracks in the roof. The space beneath the wooden roof was never in a state of aerodynamic rest. Clothing served as the primary tool for basic thermoregulation for these people. They went to sleep in thick, long undergarments and special knitted woolen caps on their heads. They often threw heavy outer garments over the light blankets they were issued for the added warming weight. The weight of several layers of coarse fabric made it difficult to turn over freely during deep sleep. However, this was the only way to retain the heat accumulated during the day. Constant dampness posed no less of a problem than the cold night drafts. The humid English climate led to the constant formation of thick condensation on the cold walls. Small metal objects would become covered with a reddish patina of rust within a few weeks. Clothes left on open shelves quickly took on an unpleasant, musty smell of mold. Airing out the rooms on rare clear days was a strictly mandatory procedure to combat the dampness. Candles were often used not only for lighting, but also to visualize drafts. The dim flame constantly flickered and swayed under the influence of invisible air currents. Sometimes a candle had to be placed in a deep jar to prevent it from being blown out by a sudden gust of wind. The wax melted quickly and unevenly on one side due to the constant directed airflow. Conserving candles was a difficult task under such harsh aerodynamic conditions. The harsh temperature conditions during the summer months radically and abruptly changed the situation. The dark slate, heated over the long day, gave off copious amounts of heat into the rooms throughout the night. The stuffiness in the attic became simply unbearable due to the extremely poor air circulation in the summer. The small square windows were completely unable to remove the hot air from the narrow rooms. Sleeping in such conditions was just as physically difficult as in the winter cold. Builders attempted to solve the ventilation problem with special projecting dormer windows. These were located directly on the roof slopes and were shaped like small wooden houses. The sashes of these windows were often solid and had wooden shutters instead of glass. The shutters let in fresh air but reliably protected the room from direct rain. However, during heavy storms, water still seeped inside onto the wooden floor. The climatic conditions under the roof demanded tremendous daily physical endurance. The human body had to adapt to constant, sharp temperature fluctuations and dampness. In your opinion, which methods of heat conservation were the most effective? In the next chapter, you will learn details about the secret routes for moving around inside the enormous building. The architecture of the hidden internal passageways formed an incredibly complex labyrinth. Behind the ornate wallpaper lay an entire network of narrow passages, completely invisible to the untrained eye. These long corridors connected cramped attic spaces with various parts of the large house. The width of the passages often did not exceed 1 meter, which saved valuable living space in the building. One had to move through them very quickly and as quietly as possible. The entrances to the secret corridors were carefully disguised as ordinary interior elements. Doors on the formal floors were often covered with the same expensive wallpaper as the walls. The handles of such hidden doors were made as inconspicuous as possible or concealed within wooden panels. From the inside, these passageways looked like narrow, dark tunnels made of bare brick or unpainted planks. The contrast between the bright luxury of the halls and the gloomy simplicity of the corridors was truly striking. Soundproofing these internal passageways was critical to the owner's peace of mind. Corridor walls were often constructed as double walls with a large air gap in the middle. The floor was lined with a thick layer of wood shavings beneath the rough-hewn planks to absorb the sound of quick footsteps. The use of squeaky metal door hinges was absolutely and categorically unacceptable. All mechanisms were regularly lubricated to ensure the heavy doors slid perfectly and silently. There was virtually no permanent lighting in the secret passages. Windows in these narrow internal tunnels were not included in the original architectural plan. People had to move around using small handheld lanterns or candles in sealed glass flasks. Knowing the route by heart was a strict requirement for every inhabitant of the upper levels. In complete darkness, only the familiar tactile sensations from the walls helped with navigation. A complex branching system of staircases connected these corridors strictly vertically. In addition to the main black staircase, there were small spiral staircases leading down 1 or 2 floors. They led directly to utility rooms, linen closets, or straight to the basement kitchens. The angle of these wooden steps was extremely and dangerously steep. One had to descend them sideways, holding tightly onto the rough wooden handrails. The flow of traffic was strictly regulated by senior staff. Running into another person in a narrow, dark passageway was highly undesirable. A system of coded quiet taps on the walls was used to warn of one's rapid approach. This allowed people to stop in advance at a wider spot or a special door niche. Logistics within the cold walls ran smoothly thanks to strict rules. Drafts in these long corridors created the effect of a powerful wind tunnel. Icy air was sucked forcefully through the cracks and rushed upward into the attic. The temperature in the passageways was always significantly lower than in the bright adjoining rooms. The intense cold penetrated through the thin uniforms during long walks through the building. Lingering in these tunnels was extremely uncomfortable due to the constant icy wind. Using these passageways allowed the work to be carried out completely unnoticed. The staff would appear in the reception halls quietly, as if by magic. Rooms were cleaned only when the owners were away, thanks to quick movements through hidden doors. To any casual outside observer, the enormous house seemed like a self-sustaining mechanism. The magic of comfort was entirely provided by a complex architectural web of hidden passageways. Maintaining the corridors themselves required regular physical effort. Dusting in the dark and extremely narrow spaces was an extremely awkward task. A thick web of cobwebs quickly covered the ceilings, requiring the use of long brushes on wooden poles. Washing the floors in tunnels without windows or ventilation resulted in the planks taking a very long time to dry. Moisture stagnated in the enclosed, airless space, creating a heavy smell of damp, old wood. The psychological toll of being in confined spaces was significant. Moving through dark, narrow corridors every day required strong nerves. The complete absence of daylight and the oppressive brick walls created a persistent sense of isolation. This hidden network of passageways was the true circulatory system of the enormous stone mansion. Life in the house depended on constant movement through these invisible, narrow arteries. The organization of personal belongings on the upper levels was a model of maximum efficiency. The harsh, Spartan conditions of the attic spaces dictated strict rules for handling possessions. Sturdy wooden chests made of dense wood served as the main safes for all necessities. Corners reinforced with thick iron reliably protected the chest from damage during rare moves. Built-in sturdy locks safeguarded the few valuables from prying eyes. Uniforms required special daily attention and very careful handling. Every crease in the clothing had to look absolutely flawless at the start of the workday. To maintain the shape, wooden hangers with struts were used, which were hung directly from the rafters. The heavy fabric was regularly cleaned with stiff brushes to remove settled dust and soot. Ironing the uniform in the attic was impossible. This was always done in the laundry rooms downstairs. Reliable protection of clothing from dampness was a constant concern for attic dwellers. Cloth bags filled with dry lavender or other fragrant herbs were always placed in the trunks. This was excellent for repelling moths and masked the heavy smell of damp wood. Periodically, items were taken out into the long corridor to dry thoroughly on clear, windy days. Uniforms ruined by dampness meant serious trouble and large deductions from pay. Rugged footwear was stored with no less care on special low wooden shelves. Heavy leather boots were regularly greased with thick animal fat to protect them from moisture and cracking. The insides of the shoes were tightly stuffed with dry paper to maintain their proper shape. It was strictly forbidden to bring dirty outdoor shoes into the bedroom after a long workday. The soles were cleaned in the stairwells using special metal scrapers. Personal valuables not related to work took up minimal space in a trunk. Small wooden boxes securely hid letters from home, photographs, or small trinkets. These items held immense sentimental value for people permanently separated from their families. There was simply nowhere to store bulky items due to the acute shortage of free space. Every new purchase required very careful consideration before buying. The meager bedding took up nearly half the total volume of a personal trunk. Heavy woolen blankets were folded as neatly as possible at the very edge of the bed during the day. Straw mattresses had to be periodically turned over and fluffed to prevent the filling from clumping. Spare bedding was stored only in locked communal hall closets. Access to clean sheets was strictly controlled by the senior staff of the home. Clean everyday clothes for the rare days off were hung separately from the uniforms. They had to be ironed and completely ready for use at any moment. Protective long covers made from old sheets shielded these outfits from the ever-present attic dust. A trip to the big city was a long-awaited event requiring a flawless appearance. Meticulous care of the formal attire took up a significant portion of the rare free time. Supplies for daily cleaning were often stored in the same rooms or in the nearby hallway. Wooden brushes, buckets, and rags had to be always within reach for immediate use. Damp, dirty cleaning supplies were left to dry on the windowsills of small dormer windows. The lingering scent of wet wood and soap was firmly associated with these upper floors. Tools were just as much a part of the simple interior as wooden chests. The lack of any heating helped to preserve certain types of materials. Woolen knitwear was less prone to deterioration in a cool environment without drastic temperature fluctuations. The thick, heavy fabrics of the uniforms withstood the constant cold of the wooden rooms well. However, the shiny metal buttons and buckles required constant polishing to protect them from rust. The lengthy care of these small details became a daily routine before a short night's sleep. Each storage space was strictly assigned to a specific person. Rare disputes over space were resolved quickly and always in favor of those higher in rank. Strict, perfect order was essential for survival in the cramped, dimly lit attic. The belongings reflected the exceptionally modest and utilitarian lives of their weary owners. The jagged geometry of the sloping roofs fostered a deep-rooted habit of minimalism and extreme neatness in everything. The problem of poor lighting on the upper floors was solved solely out of strict financial necessity. Dim daylight penetrated inside through tiny dormer windows with great reluctance. The sharp angle of the rays cast deep shadows in the corners of rooms with sloped ceilings. During the dark winter months, the dim sun illuminated the narrow rooms for only a few hours in the middle of the day. The inhabitants of the attic spent most of the day in a thick, heavy, gray twilight. The use of cheap candles was the primary means of obtaining artificial warm light. For the cold upper floors, the cheapest candles made from animal fat or lard were purchased. They always burned with an uneven flame, emitting a characteristic and very unpleasant odor as they melted. The black wicks required constant trimming with special metal scissors to prevent heavy soot buildup. Soot from these candles settled very quickly on the light-colored plaster of the ceilings and walls. Candle consumption was strictly controlled by the housekeeper and distributed only on a ration basis. Each person was allotted a strict limit, which was barely enough for brief evening gatherings. Reading before bed was considered an unallowable luxury and a waste of a precious resource. We had to go to bed almost immediately after dark and the end of an exhausting work shift. Life in the attic was completely and strictly synchronized with the natural light of day. Expensive oil lamps were used only in wide corridors or on wooden stair landings. They provided a brighter and more stable yellow light compared to cheap tallow candles. The metal bodies of the heavy lamps were securely fastened to the walls on special brackets to prevent them from falling. Refilling the lamps with oil and cleaning the fragile glass bulbs were part of the staff's daily duties. The sharp smell of burnt oil constantly hung in the cold air of the dark passageways. Fire safety, when handling fire, was of the utmost importance in the dry wooden attics. Candles were strictly permitted only on metal or ceramic trays with high rims. Falling asleep with a lit candle was strictly forbidden, under threat of immediate eviction from the house. The old wooden rafters and dry floorboards were ideal fuel for a massive fire. A constant fear of fire was a constant companion to life under the very roof. The cold moonlight sometimes became the only source of light on clear nights. A pale glow filtered through the dirty panes, casting the whimsical rectangles of the window frames onto the floor. This extremely dim light was enough to move safely through a room, known down to the last centimeter. On a full moon, the light reflected off the smooth lead details of the roof, creating a silvery glow from the outside. Such nights brought a small visual relief after the pitch-black darkness of the long winter months. Fine work with small details in the dim light severely impaired the vision of the attic dwellers. Mending torn clothing or sewing on missing buttons had to be done right up against the window during the day. On cloudy days, threading a needle was a real test of dexterity. Eyeglasses were an incredibly expensive luxury, out of reach for the vast majority of workers in the enormous mansion. Rapid vision loss was considered an occupational hazard that was simply not to be discussed. Mirrors in the cramped attic rooms were hung in such a way as to catch as much light as possible. Small, cloudy pieces of glass without heavy frames were mounted on the wooden walls opposite the windows. The faint reflected light helped them better examine their uniforms before heading out to the grand main floors. Every long morning began with a thorough inspection of one's appearance in this dim reflection. A flawless appearance was always required, regardless of living conditions or the room's lighting. Phosphorus matches appeared a little later and became a true domestic breakthrough in the lives of the upper floors. They made it possible to quickly start a fire in the dark without using a flint and tinder. The matches were stored in sealed tin boxes for reliable protection against the constant dampness of the attic. The sound of a match striking the box was often the first sound to break the morning silence under the roof. A small flash of warm light signaled the start of a new, incredibly long workday. Light was as scarce a resource on the upper floors as heat. Severe restrictions fostered a habit of minimizing the use of open flames in daily life. The dim light perfectly concealed the shabbiness of the surroundings, hiding the peeling walls and cracks in the floors. Life unfolded entirely in the shadows, as if to underscore the low social status of the invisible inhabitants of the vast house. Saving on lighting was yet another simple way to reduce the costs of maintaining the building. The layout of the space under the roof strictly reflected the internal social hierarchy of the workers in this enormous house. The attic was not a uniform space. It was divided into separate zones with varying levels of basic comfort. Senior staff were given spacious private rooms with relatively straight walls and proper doors. Junior staff huddled in cold communal dormitories located in the most inconvenient parts of the sloping roof. The interior architecture starkly emphasized the status of every individual within this complex social system. The housekeepers' and butlers' rooms were often located closer to the grand staircases for a quick descent. These warm rooms might have small fireplaces, which was an incredible luxury for the upper floors. The windows in these rooms were significantly larger, providing better lighting and the possibility of good ventilation. The furniture here was of higher quality. Often, these were fine items discarded from the master's bedrooms. Their status allowed them to have soft carpets on the floor and thick curtains on the windows. The personal servants of the wealthy homeowners also enjoyed certain spatial privileges in the attic. Their rooms were located on the lowest levels of the attic, closer to the floors above. This ensured a slightly higher temperature thanks to the heat seeping up from below through the thick floorboards. In these bedrooms, high-quality oil lamps were permitted instead of cheap, sooty tallow candles. Proximity to the owners provided small practical advantages, even at the very top. The shared dormitories for the lowest-ranking staff consisted of long, narrow alcoves under the rafters. Hard beds stood in a long row, leaving a narrow passage for a single person to pass through. Personal space here was limited only to the area of the mattress and a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. The architectural plan did not provide for any partitions or screens in such rooms at all. Privacy in the huge communal dormitory was absolutely impossible at any time of day. The heavy wooden doors between the different areas of the attic were always locked with massive metal locks. Passage from the women's quarters to the men's was controlled by senior staff with truly iron discipline. The heavy metal keys to the connecting doors were kept only by the housekeeper, attached to a key ring on her belt. This layout system prevented absolutely any breaches of discipline during non-working hours under the roof. The dark labyrinth of rooms functioned as a well-guarded internal perimeter. The noise level in different parts of the wooden attic also depended heavily on the hierarchical layout. The senior staff's rooms were located in dead-end corridors where other people rarely ventured. The bedrooms of junior staff were situated next to noisy staircases and humming water pipes. The rumble of hurried footsteps and the creak of doors constantly accompanied brief moments of rest in these high-traffic areas of the attic. Silence was a rare privilege, available only to the leaders of this vast and complex mechanism. The allocation of beds in the spacious communal rooms also followed internal unspoken rules of seniority. The warm spots by the windows or away from drafts went to those who had worked there longer. New arrivals always received the coldest beds near drafty doors or under leaky hatches. A move to a more comfortable spot occurred only after one of the senior comrades was dismissed. This fostered loyalty and patience during the long wait for an improvement in the harsh living conditions. The daily cleaning of the attic rooms fell on the weary shoulders of the lowest-ranking workers in the hierarchy. They had to wash the floors with ice-cold water and dust every single room, including the manager's bedrooms. This added grueling hours to their already incredibly long and arduous schedule. Senior staff never engaged in maintaining basic cleanliness in their own living quarters under the roof. High status completely exempted them from menial labor, even in their personal lives. The quality of bedding varied greatly depending on one's position in the vast house. Thin woolen blankets without holes or patches were issued only to personal servants and senior management. The lowest-ranking servants had to make do with coarse, scratchy fabric that provided little warmth and irritated the skin. Changing the bedding was permitted only according to a strict schedule, which was less frequent for the lower-ranking servants. This small detail once again underscored the colossal social inequality within a single floor. The Victorian stone house was a perfect microcosm of a society with rigid class divisions and rules. The wooden attic served as a perfect mirror of this system, reflecting the hierarchy in square meters in degrees of warmth. The strict division of this vast space ensured order and the smooth operation of the building's massive machinery. Life under the cold roof slopes demanded endurance and complete acceptance of one's station. Every person knew exactly where they belonged within this complex architectural and social structure. Exploring such remarkable architectural details allows us to take a fresh look at the history of everyday life in past eras. The harsh conditions of the attics in massive Victorian houses vividly illustrate the colossal social divide of that time. Please suggest interesting topics for future videos that you'd like to see in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new in-depth historical investigations.